Good morning, good listeners, and welcome back to the Shakespop Podcast, where we explore the afterlives of Shakespeare across culture, media, and meaning. This month, we've been thinking deeply about British Asian Shakespeare, about adaptation, inheritance, and the question that keeps resurfacing: who gets to claim Shakespeare, and on what terms? And if earlier in the series we've explored this through literature, film, and critical theory, today we turn to the stage because performance is where these questions become most immediate, most embodied, and perhaps most urgent. My guest today is Samir Bhamra, a director, writer, and the creative force behind some of the most exciting British Asian reimaginings of Shakespeare in recent years. Through his work, Shakespeare is not simply adapted, but resounded, inflected through language, music, migration, and memory. In this conversation, we'll be talking about what it means to direct Shakespeare from within a British Asian cultural framework, how questions of audience and authenticity shape performance choices, and why collaboration across disciplines, traditions, and communities is not just a method but a necessity. We'll also be thinking about hybridity, not as a buzzword, but as a lived practice. What happens when Shakespeare meets Bollywood aesthetics? When classical text meets diasporic experience? When the archive meets the contemporary stage? So, whether you're here for Shakespeare, for theatre, or for the evolving story of British Asian cultural production, this is a conversation that asks us not just to watch differently, but to listen differently too. Let's begin. Hi, Samir, and welcome to the Shakespop Podcast. This is a sort of anniversary for us. We met exactly about 10 years ago now for the when I was organizing the Shakespeare and Indian Cinema Conference with BFI and Asia House.
I remember how green I was also at that time around having to discuss about Shakespeare and feeling so unqualified amongst all these great academics there.
Yeah, well, you've done a lot more work since then on Shakespeare, so hopefully the conference was just a good starting point for you. So, just so, as I was telling you earlier, I've been looking at some of the interviews that you've given in the last few years. And you've described your work as being about creating opportunities for British Asian performers and
Mhm.
telling stories that reflect contemporary Asian experiences. So I'm really interested in that phrasing, creating opportunities, as much as creating work. So do you see yourself primarily as a storyteller or someone building the infrastructure that allows those stories to exist?
Wow, incredible provocation to start with. Um, I'm not sure I can separate the two really. I guess when I started physical, I just wanted to tell a story about choosing your destiny, which is very Shakespearean in its way, you know. Um, but I could also only do it with the resources that we had. No one was willing to invest in a newcomer in the industry, someone who was transitioning from a different career, even though had trained in theatre and dance, but not in that formal sort of way. So I guess I had to be creative about um, how to do it. And that meant by basically that meant that we created opportunities for talented South Asians who also wanted to perform, who wanted to tour, who wanted to, contribute to the South Asian arts and cultural fabric. Um, but there were no avenues for them, and uh, they weren't avenues for them because they didn't go to drama school either. They also came from that non-traditional background of training. Saturday mornings, you go to learn tabla, you go and learn dance, and you go through your ISTDs and right up to like grade 8, etc. But you're never really seen as being professional
Mhm.
by the elite sector that we're in.
Yes.
Um, so, and then with that also came a lot of imposter syndrome, really, which I think still um, hangs over each one of our heads, that we were never good enough, because that's what we were made to believe and that's what we were made to think. Um, and coming back to stories, I think that if you're only telling stories, then stories tend to disappear.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted to do something that was a bit more that was going to create a legacy, I guess,
Mm.
um, by uh, if you create the infrastructure, you create something that will survive.
Yeah.
Um, and if that survives, and if the talent survives, then the stories that they have been connected to also survives because it's on their biogs, and people are curious about it. And um, so, absolutely, yes, I love to work and I love to create work as a storyteller, but I think that it's also my responsibility then to create to build the conditions that allow talented people to come to the forefront, and for our stories to exist.
Mm.
Because,
Well,
yeah,
sorry
historically,
to interrupt you here, but you were speaking about imposter syndrome and the non-traditional background of some of these performers. Do you feel that South Asian performers tend to be hemmed in by the association with outdated representations of Bollywood then? Because that's something you've mentioned as well in one of your interviews. So, are you trying to move South Asian stories out of those typical Bollywood narratives?
I think what I mean is that when a venue wants to commission a South Asian artist to make a larger scale, mid to large scale piece of work, in their mind, they're expecting something Bollywood. And that Bollywood is the 70s and 80s, not necessarily so much the 70s, but definitely the 80s kitsch,
Mhm.
uh, with dancing with the dusters, and the colorful dusters
Like
that
changing the light bulbs
yeah,
move.
yeah, all of that. And they have this idea that Bollywood is melodramatic kitsch of rich girl, poor boy, tragic love stories, or something even cheesier.
Mhm.
Um, so when I want to make Bollywood, firstly, I question um, what exactly is Bollywood? Um, is it the language? Is it as in Hindi cinema language, as in Hindi language,
Mhm.
or can I get away with English dialogues and English songs with Indian melodies, or do I create something hybrid that sort of mixes a bit of both, or do I actually kind of go all authentic and go, okay, I need my audience to understand the story, so the story will be in English, the dialogues will entirely be in English, but the songs will remain true to what Bollywood is, and they're in Hindi language. Um, so there's an element of all of that. But then when you look at our stories in Hindi cinema, or even just Indian cinema in general, they are so varied. They go so beyond rich girl, poor girl narratives, and
Yeah.
um, you know, um, and I think when I spoke about this, I must have been making Bombay Superstars,
Yes.
which was, you know, about the contribution of women in the 70s in Indian
Mhm.
cinema, and how they transformed the idea of an Indian heroine being a Sati Savitri, sanskari, always in a sari, generally always crying, um, pure and pious, and women are not like that. Well, at least women in my life are not like that. That's not to say that they don't have devotion to gods, or, you know, to faith or whatever, but they are fierce creatures. They are fighters, and they are soft, uh, emotional thinkers that make you think differently. They change your perception through,
Mhm.
you know, and I wanted to tell that story of the women like Zinat Aman, Parveen Bharbi, Rekha, Shabana Azmi, who all literally transformed the way my aunts, my mum, you know, how they all behaved and how they dressed, and the choices that they then made in their lives, and the idea that, you know, uh, women could be like a boss man, um, and they rise so high that they're actually dictating the terms,
Mm.
um, and they're not in those trapped relationships where there are no escape routes,
Yeah.
you know, um, of stories around marital fidelity. When you think about Earth, starring Shabana Azmi,
Yeah.
um, and you think about acceptance, you know, and or when you think of Amitabh's films, which are always about the underdog, you know, the lavaris, the bastard child, etc. Um, Western cultural institutions don't associate those stories
Yes.
as, as Bollywood. They're like, well, it's as EastEnders as it can get, really.
Yes.
And that's kind of what I want to do, is I just want to just go, hang on, you know, we have some powerful stories, um, of our own histories that are just being wiped out. So if you just watch something that is current Bollywood, you'll see that the world has evolved so much, and our taste buds have changed so much as well.
Mm. So I want to turn to Shakespeare then,
Okay.
because your Cymbeline and your broader engagement with Shakespeare sits within a sort of a growing movement of adaptations that relocate Shakespeare into diasporic cultural context. It's happening in America, Australia, UK, Singapore, China, of course. So, what's interesting is that critics often frame this as bringing new audiences to Shakespeare. In fact, in 2012, when I first came to the UK for my PhD, they were talking in those terms when they were doing that the productions at the Globe, where they brought all those international productions. So I'm wondering why we're still talking in those terms. So I'm wondering if that framing is missing something, because in a lot of scholarship, if you think of Anya Lumba, for example, Shakespeare's global reach is described as something that was produced through empire rather than existing outside it. So when you're adapting Shakespeare, are you working within that idea of universality, or are you challenging it?
There's so many things to unpick over there.
Sorry,
In that.
long question there.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, I mean, I think the first thing is Shakespeare and Empire. He is Britain's biggest export. And during the East India Company, his works came to India, and they were performed for the elite soldiers and the, you know, the colonels and lieutenants, etc. And then they were performed also for the Maharajas and the Nawabs, who, as you know, then adapted some of those works for their own
Yeah.
communities, so that through those stories that the stories that communities in India um, were enjoying or experiencing were beyond just the stories from the scriptures,
Mm.
and they were looking at the human condition. But you know, the way they did it was, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is they the way they did it was, this is culture. This is the best culture. your culture is not good enough as
Mm.
this. And that's kind of what I disagree with, because when you look at the scriptures, what's to say that King Lear isn't the same as Pitama Bhishma from the Mahabharata? You know, what's to say Romeo and Juliet aren't Heer Ranja or Leila Majnu or Soni Mahibal, um, and or Panchatantra being very similar to Midsummer Night's Dream. And all of these stories, essentially, we also have them in our culture. And Shakespeare is also in himself one of the biggest adapters of stories. His stolen stuff from the Decameron, um, and he's made them relevant for the people of his time,
Mm.
and through love for those works, which is incredible. I'm not going to deny that the works aren't incredible. They have survived through the passions of the next generations. They've become the legacy, and when you then go to another country and say this is the best, obviously people are going to be curious about wanting to try it and wanting to understand it. I didn't learn Shakespeare until I was 14. Um, so the iambic, the meter, the rhythms were all alien to me. I'm like, I might as well have been reading Russian when I came across it. I'm just like, these are English words, but they don't make any sense to me. Um, and I had a lovely English teacher and a drama teacher who both sort of just made me think slightly differently, and they helped identify, okay, so when he's talking about the picture of Venus, and are there pictures of beautiful women that exist in my culture?
Mm.
And when I started to think like that, I was immediately like able to connect the dots and understand the story, understand the words. I still struggle, but when it came to Cymbeline, it was the one that was the closest I could find to a Manmohan Desai film.
Yes.
And I love Manmohan Desai films. He is as Shakespearean and as Mahabharata and Ramayana as mixed as you can get. And so when it came to Cymbeline, I was literally seeing it as a Manmohan Desai film. And all those uh, visuals that the text present um, were things I had seen, when Yakimo stands on top of Inogen, Inogen, um, before he steals her bangle. He is like Ravana to me.
Mm.
He's mighty and powerful, and he's broken into her room, invading her privacy. But then there were other elements, like Cymbeline has the bangle, and I was like, okay, that's like Shogun, the bangles that a mother-in-law gives to her future daughter-in-law. But then the stakes didn't feel quite high enough. I'm like, okay, this man has now got the Shogun Kangan. Um, that's not going to make some man believe that his wife has been unfaithful. She might have just sold them. What's more powerful? And in Western culture, you'd go the wedding ring, but
Mm.
in 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 India, and especially for a Hindu woman, the Mangalsutra
Right.
is the noose essentially that she wears when she gets married, and God forbid that noose is lost, because it's her husband's life is around her neck, his
Mm.
honor is around her neck, and that became the starting point of understanding it and then adapting it so that I could condense a 3-hour script into 2 hours.
Mm. Mm. So, just to push on that point a bit more, there were quite a few things that you've managed to translate from Shakespeare into your context. But did you find anything that resisted translation? Anything that just wouldn't make sense in this context?
Yes, I mean, I struggled a lot with the war, the
Mm.
Milford Haven War, and I was like, where in history could I do this? And originally, when I wanted to set it, I wanted to set it in the Mughal era, and it made sense to me to set it then. Um, and then I discovered via an incredible woman called Suman Butcher, who I call the Oracle, that
Yes.
um, another Asian director, British South Asian director, had directed a version of Cymbeline set in the Mughal court, and I was lost. I was like, okay, there goes my war sequence. What am I going to do? And it was eventually just looking deep into myself that I realized, I'm the child of two very different faiths, and those faiths want to kill each other all the time, post the Mughal era. And I thought, what about if I set it into that kind of world? What if
Mm.
um, uh, uh, Posthumous? Is it Posthumous? I've now
Yes.
even forgotten the names. Posthumous. What if Posthumous is Sheruddin, and what if Inogen is Inojan?
Mm.
Um, and then I can translate the story into 1990s Bombay because Mani Ratnam's film had
Yeah.
just come out, and it was the first film I saw in the cinema, and I was very moved by it. I mean, it's one of my favorite films. Um, and I immediately thought, you know what, this works. Move it to Bollywood, set it in the 1990s when there was a big tension between the underworld in Dubai and the Bombay film industry, and how all these incredible, powerful um, film personalities were being threatened, were being killed by the underworld, and it just made sense,
Mm.
and he's banished out from India to go to Dubai, posthumous, um, and it just connected. I mean, the only part that doesn't work very well still is when we find Cymbeline's lost sons.
Mm.
Um, they were found in some hills in the forest somewhere, and the only thing I could think of at that time was, oh, okay, maybe they could be at the Sanjalila National Park in Bombay. And I was like, let's hope no one asks me about this. And um yeah, so I think that was probably the one thing that didn't translate as well.
Mm.
But eventually I think if you shift the way you think, you'll find a way to make any of those stories connect with you.
Mm.
Um, and that's one of the reasons why I think those Shakespeare's works, the scriptures remain relevant even today because they're all about human stories, really.
So some of the more enjoyable Shakespeare productions in recent times, at least for me, have been musicals. So I'm thinking the Tom Hiddleston, Haley Atwell, Much Ado. I'm thinking Anne Juliet. So do you feel that the musical form allows you to do something with Shakespeare that the original structure doesn't?
I think the minute you allow yourself to be free from the language and go, well, what is Shakespeare? Is it the words he's written, the dialogues that he's written? Is it the stories and how he's told those stories? Is it what they mean? Once you've decided where you want to sit on the barometer of the works, um, you can play with any version of it. And uh, I personally don't think there's anything wrong with creating versions of the productions that are great introducers of the text to audiences,
Mm.
uh, so that they can understand the story in a way that makes sense to them in that sort of Insta Reel TikTok vibe. But at the same time, then it makes them curious as they grow older to actually want to watch the full works,
Mm.
and then really contemplate on what exactly it means. I mean, I love musicals. I think there's nothing more exciting than rhythm, than structure, than um, musical emotion, and the power of um, being free. Um, and movement, and I think a, a, a Bollywood musical version, which actually uses Indian music, um, is yet to be done.
Mm. Might
Yet
be
to
your next project.
maybe, it's been 13 years since I directed a Shakespeare,
Mm.
but his stories and his characters and his themes do influence my writing in different ways. So I'm currently writing a piece that is very much like a mashup of The Winter's Tale, The Tempest. It's a mixture of everything. The Midsummer Night's Dream, and and I think it's a lovely little story. It's turned out. So. Hopefully, when I pitch it to venues and they ask me who's the audience, I'll say, well, firstly, start with Shakespeare.
So,
I
I
hate I
mean,
hate that question, when they say, "Oh, lovely piece," but who's the audience for it? And the person what annoys me the most is when it's someone South Asian asking me that question.
yes.
And you should be the one saying, "Oh my God, we have the audience for us in our city."
Yeah.
And we need to be brave and go and get them.
But there is still very much a hierarchy in British theatre, then you'd admit to that. And do you feel that including Shakespearean stories and making this mishmash of Bollywood stories and epic stories, do you think that your work is sort of intervening in that hierarchy, or are you actively pushing against that?
I mean, I don't think I think about it like that.
Mm,
I feel connected to a piece of work and a story, and if I'm excited enough about it 2 years, 3 years down the line, and I'm still thinking about it, then that's the story I want to tell.
mm,
And if it's a story I want to tell, then I have to figure out how am I going to tell it so that it excites the ticket-paying audience to want to come and watch this and see the
mm,
show. Um, Bring on the Bollywood in 2016, 2017 is very much the Taming of the Shrew meets um, She Stoops to Conquer.
mm,
Um, but at the same time, it is me experimenting with what is a hybrid Bollywood musical where some of the songs were in English, some of the songs were in Hindi, um, and I was testing, do the audiences understand this? And
mm,
we took it to places where you have the least South Asian audiences, and they loved it. One of the venues in the Southwest region, um, we earned the highest box office in the entire tour.
mm.
Go figure.
Yeah.
Um, and and it. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I've just realized my shed key is hanging outside the shed door.
Okay. Should we pause?
No, it's fine. I mean, I can deal with it later, but I'm just like, oh, okay. So I went out, did the thing in the shed, and then I just shut the
Left
door
the
and left the key there. Um, Scatty brain. But coming back to our question, uh, I think I have to make the numbers match.
Mm,
The finances have to meet just as much as the creativity has to meet, and the piece also has to have enough MGM moments, I think. Um, you know, um, at least since the 13 years have passed since Cymbeline, if I do direct another Shakespeare, I'd like to make sure that now it's of that scale and it has
mm,
the ability to be able to do all those magical things that I want to do with it, beyond just using the human body
mm.
as the voice and the physicality um, to tell that story. Um, yeah, I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Yes. But I wanted to follow up. Just I was thinking about what you said about representations of women earlier. Um, and you foregrounded progressive themes around gender and sexuality. So I'm wondering how that sits within audience expectations in your experience. Because sometimes representation comes with pressure to be legible or acceptable. Have you ever felt tension between expectation and authenticity?
Um, I think when you've been made to feel unaccepted in the sector, you've got nothing to lose. um, really. The number of times I've been told, this is too complicated. Why do you complicate things? Can you not make it simpler? And unfortunately, I'm not going to make it simpler until it makes sense to me. Um, so the idea of making it accessible versus it authentic um, is one that I'd pick authenticity every time because that's true representation.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and I want to represent my culture and my people on stage in the best way possible. And by that it means their good side, their dark side, their cheeky side, their fun side, their angry side, their frustrated side, their and I don't want to shy away from um, the style of work that is expected um, at mainstream large scale level, which is very television represent is it's the representation that was on television in the 90s.
Mm.
There's nothing wrong with that. I love that representation, and I'm a fan of it. But I don't want my work to also just be that. Then,
Yeah.
I'm very different in that I was born in Kenya. I lived there till I was 14. I'm a product of two different faiths. Been brought up in a very multi-faith household with people from every religion and every culture, literally in our family. Um, that my tastes are different, and so I don't want to make a piece of work, a South Asian Bollywood piece of work that goes to the ching chicka ching ching kind of narrative that is kind of expected. I mean, I use those lines because that's exactly that's been said to me. Oh,
Yes, I mean, your
yeah.
work is often described as accessible, which I feel, especially when it's a British reviewer or a reviewer who's unfamiliar with Bollywood, they're actually using it as code for simplification or even being exotic in some way, being different in some way. So, do you think British theatre still codes itself implicitly as culturally exclusive?
Um, how many times are we going to see the same Midsummer Night's Dream every year?
Yeah.
I think globally there's probably like what 400, 500 productions a year.
Mm.
And where is the newness in it? Where is the different perspective uh, in it? And through adapting and yet keeping it true to this, Cymbeline was my only piece of work where I've used Shakespeare's text. Otherwise, I would much rather just adapt the story and tell it in my own way. Um, but um, you know, it's one where I think I was trying to be authentic to both Shakespeare and also to my culture.
Mm.
Um, and I'm not answering your question because I've kind of forgotten it.
Well, just that, do you think that British theatre still considers itself as culturally exclusive? So are they still aiming for a certain type of audience? Because thinking about the question you were talking about, when you go to producers or you go to venues, are they still, because they're asking you what kind of an audience would this appeal to? What does that question imply?
That question always comes down to the risk. Uh, you know, um, I think right now, especially, I'm going to make a word up, really, in that Shakespearean tradition.
Yeah.
There's a sense of yarth
Mhm.
in the sector, the idea that, oh, everything is cozy and stable, and, but in reality, everything is eroding. Um, so when we're in those private meetings, the the, the conversations are around, um, we want to take the risk on supporting you, but we want to neutralize that risk by making sure that it is as what can I say, entertaining
Mm.
only, instead of art, or community instead of professional. Um, and British theatre still leans heavily towards text heavy, um, more Western forms than
Yeah.
musical traditions of India.
Mm.
The I think my work tries to create a distinction between the two, and I'd like to be somewhere that sits merrily between the two as well. Um,
So,
so yes,
what does
there's no hierarchy,
yes?
and we're really at the bottom.
So, what does a genuinely inclusive theatre landscape look like to you? So, not just in terms of who's visible on the stage, what kind of music is being used, but who gets to decide what stories are told?
Well, it's not people like you and me,
Still?
because we'd be in those buildings.
Hmm.
We'd be the ones making those decisions. But uh, instead, we're the ones constantly pitching to see um, how can I tell this story, because I think the story is important for not just my community, but
Hmm.
also the global South Asian community out there, and because the global South Asian community is everywhere, um, you know, it's also just as relevant to your non-South Asian audience.
Hmm.
Um, you just watch a Hollywood film, like, I don't know, Marvel or something, and you see the end credits, and all the VFX names are generally South Asian.
Yes.
When I was learning design back, I don't know, 35 years ago, and I'd open Photoshop up, and literally I'd see every South Asian name on the credits of Photoshop that, as it's
Yeah.
loading. And I'm like, wow, we're really at the forefront of technology, of law, of medicine, but somehow we're not allowed to be the people. We're creating the structure, the infrastructure
Hmm.
for other people to thrive on.
Yeah. The
And
background work.
exactly. And but we're not given the same credit for when we do it. I'd like to think that, with people like Priyanka Chopra, Jonas, and films like RRR, there's a bigger mark taking place now at
Hmm.
in the West at the Oscars and at the BAFTAs. Um, but it's still very, very small.
Also, Bridgerton.
And Bridgerton, I mean, all those outfits in Bridgerton, I'm pretty sure they're
There
all
was a sari in this season, and I was delighted. There was like a sari gown that the Viscountess was wearing, and I was delighted with the fashion choice.
amazing. Yeah, I mean, all those fabrics are from India, aren't they? You know,
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
the organzas and the
The
chiffon,
chintz.
the tints and
Yeah,
um the silks, the heavy silks that for the richness of Bridgerton comes from India, really.
absolutely. Yes.
Comes all
So,
from the
so just a last question then. Do you think if Shakespeare was writing today, would he be writing for the Globe or the RSC, or do you think he'd be writing for Netflix?
I think he'd be writing for TikTok. You know, uh, yes, I think I mean, he's always written for audiences. He's always written for people, and we have to be mindful. We can't hide from the fact that um, young people today, and definitely even people my age, would rather sometimes just spend the evening scrolling on TikTok and Insta Reels and seeing those 2-minute clips that give you that instant serotonin hit,
Yeah.
and make you laugh and make you cry and you're controlling. I think Shakespeare would be doing exactly that. Um, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Hi, Samir.
So that was my conversation with Samir. And I think what stays with me most is this idea of collaboration, not just as a creative choice, but as a cultural necessity. Because what this episode, and really this entire month, has been circling around is the idea that Shakespeare doesn't belong to any one tradition. He survives, instead, through reinvention, through translation, through performance practices that are shaped as much by lived experience as they are by literary inheritance. And perhaps that's the real takeaway here, that British Asian Shakespeare isn't a deviation from the canon. It's one of the ways the canon continues to live. If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can find me on social media or head over to Substack, where I'll be sharing a companion piece expanding on some of the themes from today's discussion. Also, if you're on TikTok or Insta, keep an eye out for some exciting announcements coming up. If you'd like to support the podcast, do consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing this episode with someone who might enjoy it. It really does help the podcast grow, especially as an independent project. Until next time, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed listening to me as much as I've enjoyed speaking with you.